why do in one video what you can do in two? So I just got done recording the Athlon 64X2 system, and I figured I'd start recording the i7-4790K video right now. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm going to be doing the same benchmarks because I already had them loaded on a flash drive. I'm actually not even using, this is Unigine superposition, I'm not even using this as a benchmark. I just thought it was something pretty for you to look at. So once again, we're going to start off with 3D Mark Cloud Gate. You know it's bad when the physics score is higher than the graphics score. That's with the 9500 GT. And then we go into the GTX 650. Once again, you're seeing basically a pretty even scaling all the way up to the 980. I've added the 980 for this test. So we now have 4 points to compare against. Yeah, so once again, this is a phone benchmark, so it's really not all that useful on a computer, especially once you get up to a high-end computer, such as this one with 16 gigabytes of RAM compared to the 3 gigabytes on the Athlon computer. Next test is the Thunderstrike benchmark, and this is where you really see why I was running a 980. That's the most balanced score on the table here, on the graph here. The 9500 GT wouldn't run, of course, because once again, DirectX 9 graphics card. The GTX 650 did run, but when your physics score is that much higher than your graphics score, this is probably not a good thing. So then we jump up to the 960, and once again, still physics score is way higher. And then the 980 is the only one that the graphics score is higher than the physics score. Dirty Bomb is the first game, the actual game that I've tried. And you see pretty good scaling here too, actually. When you're looking at the minimums, this game has a 180 frame cap, so the max frame rate that you can possibly get in this game is 180, so keep that in mind. So with the 9500 GT, I really wish I would have labeled these. That's another thing that, like, once again, not a professional computer tester. I don't do this kind of stuff very often, so I should have labeled what each one of these lines actually is. But the 9500 GT was running like less than 30 frames per second. Once again, the GTX 650 is at least running a playable frame rate. Its minimum is 50, average 60, max of somewhere around 70 or 80. So actually pretty good frame rates. The GTX 960 was running basically where that one left off. The minimum is right around where the maximum was for the GTX 650. So what I said in the previous video about this running into bottlenecks was accurate with either the CPU or the RAM. I don't know which, but I'm going to guess probably both. And then going up to the 980, once again it almost picks up where that one left off, but the minimum is a little bit lower and it hits that 180 frame rate cap. Divinity actually did run pretty well on this time, so these are all 1080p low once again. The 960 and 980 were actually running pretty even, so I'm not exactly sure what that is about. I don't think that there's a frame rate cap in this game, but I'm not entirely sure, so I'm not sure why it was running the 960 and 980 were running basically the same. I'm not sure. Maybe I was running into a VRAM cap, I don't know, because those actually have the same amount of VRAM there. And then the 9500 GT didn't run, and GTX 650 was unplayable, just barely over 25 frames per second max, so not even worth talking about. FTL is once again a very, how should I say it? It doesn't take a whole lot to run this game at 60 frames per second, and even with VSync turned off and everything uncapped, it would still cap at 60, occasionally going up to 61, so it was 59 to 61, 59 to 61, 59 to 61, and then for some reason the 980, once again because of my testing methodology, dipped down to 53, but then also went up to 63, so it had the highest max and the lowest minimum, but you know, who cares at that point, really? It's all the same. I'm gonna call that all the same. Next is Half-Life 2, which does have a 300 frame per second cap, and we pretty much instantly hit that as soon as we went up to the GTX 650. The 9500 GT was the only one that was running at 200. The max frame rate was 200, and then the minimum was sub 100. All the rest are basically pinned at 200 or 300. I mean, even a game like Half-Life 2 was either CPU or memory bottlenecked on the previous system. So even if something as good as Half-Life 2 can still get bottlenecked. PUBG is once again a very stressful DirectX 11 game, so it didn't run on the 9500 GT. The GTX 650 actually performed sort of admirably, not very well, but pretty admirably. I played at I played it around 30, so it's like playing on the Xbox One. So you know, there's your console version right there. And then I'm a terrible person. And then we go up to the GTX 960 and we get minimums of about 50 and maxes of about like 110. So pretty playable even with the GTX 960, which I was actually pretty surprised about. The GTX 980 performed a little bit better in every minimum, max, and average. It does have a cap of 144, so that's why the max is at 144. Next game is Race the Sun, and once again, like I said in the previous video, basically linear. The 9500 GT still had a really bad stutter, or like input delay, like just to move in the 9500 GT. So that was not a CPU or RAM issue, that was a graphics card issue. The GTX 650 played basically the same as it did last time. The 960 did better than it did last time, and then the GTX 980 performed, you know, like a 980, 1000 frames per second average, you know, as one does. 1000 frames per second. Apparently this doesn't have any kind of frame rate cap. I'm surprised. Usually games have some sort of frame rate cap. This one's just like, you know what? Do it. I don't care. So that's my video on the i7 system that I have here. Post any comments any questions you have in the comments. Once again, I probably should have actually, considering this is a follow-up video to the Athlon 64X2 video, I probably should have included that one's benchmarks and this one so that we could compare maybe, but you know, lazy and not really a computer review person, so I don't really do that very much. I build the computers, I don't test the computers, I just put them together, okay? And I fix them. So that's what I do. I don't do computer tests on them. Anyway, post comment down below if you like the video or if you're running a system anything like this. i7 4790K, 16 gigs of RAM, GTX 980. If you have any comments about it, I'm rambling now. I don't know how I'm going to end this video, so I'm just going to cut it. That's still recording.